My name is Olivia Carter, and if you had met me as a teenager, you might have believed I was one of those girls who had everything. A pretty two-story white house with navy shutters standing proudly on Maplewood Lane, a family business everyone in town respected, and a last name that meant trust at church picnics and Little League games. My father, Robert Carter, ran Carter & Sons Hardware with the kind of discipline that turned customers into loyalists and his son Daniel into a hometown celebrity, while my mother Margaret embodied warmth and duty, baking pies for neighbors in need and organizing fundraisers with a smile that never faltered no matter how tired her eyes looked. From the outside, we were a Norman Rockwell painting come alive. But inside, the paint was cracking, and I could see the flaws even when others pretended they weren't there. Daniel, 2 years older than me, was the sun in my father's orbit, every accomplishment of his magnified into legend, every failure forgiven before it even landed. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the dreamer who loved to sketch and lose myself in books, the girl who received polite nods for her achievements, but no thunderous applause. My father's pride in me came in drops, rationed like medicine, while Daniel was showered in it like rain. And my mother's reassurances that he loves you, just differently, sounded more like rehearsed lines than genuine comfort. Even the house seemed complicit in our charade. The floorboards creaked like secrets, the basement carried a damp smell of something rotting beneath the surface, and at night, the pipes rattled as though echoing all the words we never dared to say. Resentment, favoritism, betrayal. I learned early on to disappear, to become so quiet that I could slip through a room without disturbing the air. And for a while, I thought that was survival. Until the night, everything inside me cracked. I was 16, walking home from a school art exhibit where my painting had won first prize. The ribbon in my pocket still warm with the thrill of victory, though no one from my family had come because Daniel had football practice and family should support him. I stepped through the front door to the sound of laughter, saw Daniel on the couch with Dad watching highlights, Chinese takeout boxes littering the table, my favorite, orange chicken and lo mein, finished without a thought of me. I wanted to show them the ribbon, to demand their recognition. But instead, I went upstairs silently, clutching that ribbon in the dark and whispering a promise to myself that one day I would leave and make them see what they had lost. College was my escape hatch, and I grabbed it with both hands, working part-time jobs, chasing scholarships, and packing my dreams into 2 suitcases the day I left for the state university 3 hours away. For the first time, I could breathe without measuring myself against Daniel's shadow. But freedom has a cruel way of being temporary when family is a chain. Holidays always pulled me back into that house, back into rooms where Daniel's glow had only grown brighter with internships, girlfriends, and late-night business talks with Dad, while my own achievements, Dean's List, an internship at an art gallery, were met with polite nods and the faint smile of someone humoring a child's hobby. The balance shifted the year my grandmother died, my father's mother, a stern but loving woman who was the only one who ever truly saw me, who once pressed a quarter into my hand when I was little and said, "You've got eyes that see deeper, Olivia. Don't let them take that away." Her funeral blurred into hymns, casseroles, and the smell of lilies, but what I remember most vividly was the reading of her will in the lawyer's office, the mahogany table polished to a shine, the fluorescent lights buzzing above us, and the way Daniel leaned back casually as if the universe was about to deliver what was already his by right. The lawyer cleared his throat and announced that my grandmother's estate would be divided equally between her 2 grandchildren, Daniel and Olivia Carter. For a single, suspended moment, silence filled the room like a storm building, and I felt for the first time that the cracks in our perfect family were about to split wide open. The silence that followed the reading of my grandmother's will was not just quiet, it was sharp, like glass suspended in the air, and I felt the sting of it before anyone even spoke. My father's jaw tightened, my mother looked at her folded hands, and Daniel's casual lean stiffened, as though the world had made a mistake in putting my name on equal ground with his. For a moment, I thought maybe this was justice. Maybe life had finally remembered me. But I should have known better, because justice in my family was always a currency, not a principle. "That can't be right," Daniel said, his voice too calm, like a man preparing to renegotiate rather than accept. And my father cleared his throat in agreement, asking the lawyer to double-check the paperwork, because clearly, surely, my grandmother would not have split her estate equally when Daniel was the one carrying on the Carter name, when Daniel was the one invested in the family business. I sat there, hands trembling beneath the table, hearing them rewrite history in real time, as though my years of effort, my bond with my grandmother, my existence as anything more than a shadow, could be erased with a few well-placed arguments. The lawyer, a tired man with rimmed glasses, assured us that the will was clear and legally binding, but in my father's eyes, I saw the storm already forming, not of legality, but of control, because he had never let anyone else dictate the balance of power in our home. That night, the air in the house was heavy, though no one spoke directly of what had been said. And at dinner, my father passed dishes to Daniel with the usual ease, while my mother asked about his plans after graduation, both of them leaving me to eat in silence, as if the equal inheritance I had been granted was not a gift for my grandmother, but a crime I had committed. Over the next weeks, subtle things began to change. My father, who had always been curt but predictable with me, started reminding me of the money he had invested in my education, telling me in casual tones that without the family support, I wouldn't have the opportunities I had. While Daniel dropped hints about how difficult it was to manage the hardware store and how unfair it would be for me to tie up assets that could otherwise help the business grow. They never outright said, "Give it up, Olivia." But the implication dripped into every conversation, corroding my sense of security until I started to wonder if maybe they were right, if maybe I was selfish for wanting what my grandmother had explicitly intended for me. The house, that perfect white house with the navy shutters, felt darker every time I returned. I could feel the shift in the walls, in the way my father's voice sharpened when I spoke about my classes, in the way Daniel started using the word "we" when he met himself and Dad, as though I had already been written out of the family narrative. One evening, after Christmas dinner, I overheard them in the study, Daniel telling my father that Olivia doesn't understand responsibility, and my father replying that she'll come around, she always does. Words that made me realize I was not being treated as an heir, but an obstacle, something to be managed until it disappeared. My mother's silence hurt the most, because though she sometimes slipped into my room with a plate of pie or a soft, tired smile, she never once defended me out loud, never once said, "She deserves this too." Instead, she let the current sweep me away, her loyalty to my father and brother stronger than any maternal instinct to shield me. I tried to fight in small ways, reminding them that I was studying hard, working internships, planning a career in design that my grandmother had always supported. But each argument dissolved against their wall of certainty that Daniel was the rightful heir and I was at best a mistake in the paperwork. When spring came, I noticed my father and Daniel meeting more often with lawyers, though they brushed off my questions with vague answers about business expansions. And a creeping dread began to root in me that they were maneuvering behind my back. That dread turned into confirmation when I found a document left open on my father's desk during one of my weekend visits, a draft agreement discussing the consolidation of my grandmother's assets under Carter and Sons, with my name mentioned only in the context of future transfer. My hands shook as I read it, the realization slamming into me that they weren't waiting for me to come around. They were planning to erase me from the inheritance entirely, to fold my half of the estate into Daniel's control under the guise of family unity. When I confronted my father about it, he didn't even flinch. He looked at me with that cold, measured gaze I had known all my life and said, "It's for the good of the family, Olivia. You don't understand the pressure Daniel is under." And in that moment, the betrayal became clear. Not just in the plan to strip me of what was rightfully mine, but in the confirmation that I had never truly been considered equal, that my worth in this family was negotiable, disposable, and always conditional on my silence. I went back to college carrying not just textbooks and sketch pads, but a new, raw awareness that the people who should have protected me were willing to turn against me if it meant keeping their chosen son at the center. And though I tried to bury myself in work and friendships, the shadow of that betrayal stretched long, reminding me that family ties, in my world, were not bonds of love, but chains of control, waiting to tighten around my throat. The unraveling came faster than I expected, like a rope fraying strand by strand until it snapped. And I remember the exact day it happened because it was supposed to be a celebration. I had just completed my senior thesis project, a gallery installation that had taken months of late nights and endless revisions, and when my professor told me it was one of the strongest pieces he had seen in years, I felt for a fleeting moment that I had finally carved out something entirely mine, something no one could diminish. But that feeling collapsed when I received a call from the bank the very next morning informing me that certain accounts tied to my grandmother's estate had been consolidated under Carter & Sons, and that my authorization was no longer valid. At first I thought it was a mistake, some clerical error, but when I drove home that weekend to confront my father and brother, I walked into the study and found them sitting with a man in a gray suit, stacks of papers spread across the desk, and the truth lay bare before me. They had gone ahead without me, filed documents that effectively funneled my share of the inheritance into the business, under the claim of family consensus. My voice shook when I demanded an explanation, my hands clutching the back of a chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. But my father's reply was delivered with the calm authority of someone who had already rehearsed this moment. Olivia, this isn't about taking from you. This is about protecting what your grandmother built. Daniel is the one who can ensure the family legacy survives. You'll benefit indirectly, of course, but you don't need to carry that responsibility. Indirectly, such a small, poisonous word, a polite disguise for theft. And as I looked at the papers, I realized they had signed my name in proxy, used some loophole or forged consent, confident that I was too naive or too intimidated to fight. My mother stood in the doorway, wringing her hands, her face pale as parchment, and when I asked her if she knew about this, her silence screamed louder than any confession. The betrayal was not only in the act itself, but in the collusion of silence, the way my family had decided collectively that my voice was expendable, that my presence in the equation was negotiable. I stormed out of that room with my heart pounding so violently I thought it might split. And for days afterward, I wandered campus in a fog, attending classes without hearing a word, sketching in my notebook only to tear out the pages, unable to shake the image of my father calmly dismantling everything my grandmother had given me. Friends urged me to see a lawyer, to fight, but part of me hesitated because fighting meant fully acknowledging that my family had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and some fragile piece of me still wanted to believe they might come to their senses. That hope died the night Daniel called me, his voice slick with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won, telling me it was better this way and that I shouldn't make things difficult. He spoke as though I were a child throwing a tantrum, not a grown woman whose rights had been stripped away, and I realized with a cold, final clarity that my brother did not see me as his equal, not even as his sister anymore, but as an obstacle he had successfully removed. Anger replaced grief then, a sharp and burning anger that cut through the fog, and I began gathering every document, every email, every voicemail that hinted at what they had done, determined to prove that I was not invisible, that I would not be erased quietly. But even as I prepared, the weight of the betrayal pressed deeper. I thought about every family dinner where I had bitten my tongue, every holiday where I had laughed at Daniel's jokes, every quiet moment where I had allowed myself to believe that despite the favoritism, we were still bound by something real. And now I saw those moments for what they were: illusions. A stage set for a family that only existed in the eyes of the town, not within the walls of our home. The true breaking point came when I returned one last time to the house to collect some personal things. And I found my childhood bedroom stripped bare, the drawings I had left behind tossed into boxes in the garage, as though I were already gone, erased not just from the finances, but from the very fabric of the home. Standing in that empty room, I realized the betrayal was not just about money or inheritance. It was about identity, about the deliberate rewriting of family history to exclude me, to recast the story of the Carters as one where Daniel was the heir and Olivia was nothing more than a footnote. In that moment, grief turned into resolve. If they wanted to erase me, then I would etch myself into the world outside these walls so deeply that they could never pretend I hadn't existed. Leaving Maplewood Lane for the last time was not a dramatic moment with slammed doors or shouted curses. It was quiet, almost too quiet, like the final page of a book turned in silence. And as I drove away with the boxes of my belongings rattling in the back seat, I realized that the family I had once believed in existed only in fragments of memory, never in the reality that had unfolded before me. In the months that followed, I did what my father and brother had never imagined I would do. I fought back, not with screaming matches or desperate pleas, but with paper, with the same documents they had used to corner me. I found a lawyer willing to take my case, a woman named Sandra, who looked me in the eye and said, "They underestimated you. That's your greatest advantage." The legal process was long, tangled with filings and hearings, but with every step, I felt myself reclaiming something more than money. I was reclaiming my right to exist as more than the silent girl in the corner. My father tried intimidation, warning me that lawsuits would tear the family apart, as if their betrayal hadn't already done so, while Daniel called me selfish and ungrateful, accusing me of jeopardizing the business. But their words no longer pierced me the way they once had, because I had finally stopped seeking validation from the very people who thrived on withholding it. When the case settled, I didn't get everything back, compromises or the currency of justice, but I got enough to honor my grandmother's intent and enough to build a life that was mine, not tethered to the hardware store or the Carter name. With that money, I opened a small art studio in a converted loft downtown, a place filled with canvases and sunlight where young artists could exhibit their work. And for the first time, I felt not just free, but purposeful. People began to know me not as Robert Carter's daughter or Daniel Carter's sister, but as Olivia Carter, artist, mentor, survivor of something most small towns would never talk about out loud: the betrayal that festers inside families when love becomes conditional and loyalty is measured only in how well you serve the chosen heir. Over time, the anger softened into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of weary acceptance. I no longer needed their approval, and in that detachment, I found strength. My mother visited me once, months after the dust had settled, bringing a pie as if sweetness could patch years of silence. And she sat in my studio, looking at the paintings with tears in her eyes, whispering, "I should have done more." I didn't absolve her, but I didn't turn her away either. I had learned that carrying bitterness was just another form of bondage, and I had already freed myself once. As for my father and Daniel, they carried on as though nothing had happened, the business thriving, their names respected in town. But I no longer lived in their shadows, and that was victory enough. Sometimes, late at night, when the studio is quiet and the city hums faintly outside, I think of my grandmother's words, "You've got eyes that see deeper, Olivia." And I realize she must have known this day would come, must have known that her gift to me was not just money, but the reminder that seeing deeper means surviving what others cannot bear to face. Family betrayal is a wound that never fully heals, but it also carves space for new life to grow. And in that space, I built a world that was entirely mine. The girl who once stood invisible in the corner of a perfect house had arisen, quietly but unmistakably. And though my family may have written me out of their story, I had written myself into the world in a way they could never erase.